if we have an increase in blood calcium, then it's going to stimulate who? If it's an increase in blood calcium, which cells are we stimulating?
Parathyroid.
Parafollicular cells in the thyroid, or these are also our C cells, and they are going to sense an increase in blood calcium and respond by releasing what hormone? This is for an increase in blood calcium, calcitonin, which makes them this makes them the sensor because they're sensing the increase, and they're also the control center because they're releasing calcitonin. Calcitonin is going to stimulate our effectors. The effectors in the blood calcium homeostasis pathway are bone, small intestine, and kidneys. At bone, what cells are we going to stimulate? Osteoblasts, because they're going to be able to pull out this extra calcium and deposit in an osteoid. So they will deposit osteoid. So that's one way to get that excess calcium out of the blood, to deposit it in bone. Bones are a good mineral storage source. At the small intestine, calcitonin will inhibit calcium absorption. So that if there's calcium floating around in your small intestine, you just drank a gallon of milk, we're going to inhibit its absorption with calcitonin present. At the kidneys, we'll stimulate calcium excretion. So excretion is different than secretion. Secretion is when you produce and release something to the blood. Excretion is when we're removing it from the system. So at the kidneys, calcitonin will stimulate calcium excretion so that we can get rid of this excess calcium in the urine. So by depositing excess calcium in bone and by increasing excretion in the urine, we can get rid of it. Then we can also inhibit any calcium absorption if there's calcium floating through the small intestine. And that will bring us back to homeostasis. Questions on that? All right. Now, it's not very often that we're high in calcium, so this is like the less significant part. What we do find a lot is that we'll be low in calcium. And this is really problematic because calcium is needed for neuronal signaling, it's needed for muscle contraction, so we really have to be able to adjust this quickly if we drop in calcium. So who's going to sense this?
That'll be the parathyroid gland.
This would be the parathyroid gland, or our principal cells, our chief cells, parathyroid cells. The sensor is the parathyroid gland. It's also the control center because it's releasing what?
Parathyroid hormone.
Parathyroid hormone, which is going to stimulate our effectors. Again, the effectors in blood calcium homeostasis are bone, the small intestine, and kidneys. So what cells in bones are we going to stimulate? Osteoclasts. So they will break down bone and release that calcium to the blood. That's going to be the biggest, most potent effect. If you're low in blood calcium, chances are you're not drinking a gallon of milk, so you don't have a lot of calcium going around in your small intestine, but whatever calcium is there will increase the absorption of. So we'll say we increase calcium absorption at the small intestine. And at the kidneys, if there was any calcium that had gotten filtered out into the fluid that's becoming urine, we'll reabsorb it. So at the kidneys, we'll increase calcium reabsorption. Again, it's called reabsorption because we absorbed it the first time in our small intestine, then it got filtered out in our kidneys and was becoming part of urine, but now we need it, so we'll reabsorb it. We'll pull it out of the urine and bring it back into the blood. Now we raise our blood calcium levels and we shut down the negative feedback loop.
I forget where
Calcitriol
calcitriol is involved.
is when we're converting our vitamin D to calcitriol, and that's helping increase calcium absorption in the small intestine. But we don't really need to worry about that this semester. All right, other questions? Calcitriol works synergistically with parathyroid hormone. So that's how it's involved. It's going to help potentiate all of these things. All right, then our last two hormones. So those two hormones, calcitonin and parathyroid hormone, are antagonists. Calcitriol and parathyroid hormone are synergists. So they're working together. So the last two hormones we have to talk about are also antagonists, insulin and glucagon. So if we have an increase in blood glucose, who's going to sense this? Our sensors in the pancreas, which cells? Pancreatic islets, but which cells? If we've got an increase in blood glucose, we're going to release insulin. So our beta cells are the sensors, and they're also the control centers because they're releasing insulin. The effectors of insulin are every cell in the body, which insulin will stimulate to uptake glucose. Because every cell can use glucose for cellular respiration, that's how we get our ATP. So every cell is going to be stimulated to uptake that glucose. Other specific targets, if we have excess glucose, the liver and muscle tissue can take excess glucose and use it for glycogenesis. So glycogen is a storage form of glucose. Our liver can store glycogen that can easily be broken down again during glycogenolysis, so in times when our blood sugar drops, our muscles will use that glycogen as just like a local backup. Muscles are very energy-hungry cells, so it's good to have their own store of glucose, so that like if you're in times of anaerobic respiration, you still have glucose that is right there that's available. Or if you don't have a whole lot of blood flow going to your skeletal muscle, then we've got glycogen there that can be broken down to fuel their contraction. Other effectors at the liver, we could say, well, no, that's it for the liver. It's going to stimulate glycogenesis. At our adipose tissue, it will stimulate lipolysis. So basically what insulin is doing is it's causing cells to store stuff. It's our storage hormone that's going to be released when we're nutrient abundant. Other things that we could say, at muscle, it would stimulate anabolism. So in general, you release insulin when you've just eaten a meal. Actually, what's neat about insulin is it's the one system in our body that uses a feed-forward mechanism. Before your blood glucose actually goes up, when you start eating and are salivating, insulin will be released. So that as soon as your blood glucose goes up, your body's ready for it. Don't worry, I'm not going to test you on that. It's kind of a weird thing. But it's pretty interesting, I think, to note that even before you've broken down everything and absorbed it in your small intestine, as soon as you start eating, insulin release goes up, which is pretty cool because it gets you ready for it. All right, are we good on that? Questions on insulin? Actually, it's not, glucagon won't be our last one. We need to go over the renin angiotensin system again for aldosterone. Alright, so in between meals, if you get a drop in blood glucose, who's going to sense this?
The alpha cells.
This would be our alpha cells of the pancreas. They're going to release what? Glucagon. So that makes them the control center. Glucagon is going to stimulate the effectors at the liver. It will stimulate glycogenolysis, which is the breakdown of that stored glycogen. So we break down that stored glycogen and release it as glucose. Other things that glucagon can do, it can stimulate lipolysis at adipose. So if we break down that fat and then need to convert it to glucose, we could also say that it's gluconeogenic at liver. Those are going to be its biggest targets and the biggest effectors. And so if we break down that fat and use it to make new glucose through gluconeogenesis, then that'll raise our blood glucose. If we break down that stored glycogen, that'll raise our blood glucose. It's not really going to stimulate glycogenolysis in the muscles to a huge effect because skeletal muscles are storing that glycogen for their own use. I mean, if you're really starving, it could do it. But that's not the primary target for that. The primary target is going to be the liver. Questions on glucagon? All right, let's review our renin angiotensin system. And I'll do it with our organ pictures this time. The renin angiotensin system is important because it's getting two hormones released, antidiuretic hormone and aldosterone. So all of the organs that are involved will be the brain, the heart, the lungs, the liver, and the kidneys. So this system is activated in response to a drop in blood pressure. So the stimulus is a drop in blood pressure, and that's sensed by the kidneys. The liver, just all the time, is producing renin substrate, which is also called Angiotensinogen. And if you think about this name, O-gen is like the genesis, angiotensin, it's helping to make angiotensin. So angiotensinogen is always being released by the liver, and as soon as we have a drop in blood pressure, the kidneys will start releasing renin. So you have a drop in blood pressure, you release renin. Renin combines with angiotensinogen to become angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 goes to the heart, it gets pumped to the lungs. In the lungs we have ACE, the angiotensin converting enzyme, and what it's going to do is it's going to convert Ang1 to Ang2. Angiotensin 2 then is pumped back to the heart. So we'll go through all of the circulation for the next test, but it gets pumped back to the heart, and then it gets pumped out, and it's going to do several things. The first thing it'll do, as soon as it hits any blood vessels that have smooth muscle and constrict, it will stimulate vasoconstriction. So you decrease the diameter on the blood flowing through those vessels, and that will increase your blood pressure. The other thing angiotensin 2 is going to do is stimulate a couple things to happen in the brain. It'll stimulate ADH release from the posterior pituitary, and it's going to stimulate dipsogenesis, which is thirst. So you get thirsty and you drink more water and your blood volume increases. ADH is going to stimulate your kidneys to uptake water by increasing aquaporins. So you increase your blood volume, you increase your blood pressure. Angiotensin 2 is also going to stimulate our adrenal glands, specifically the zona glomerulosa of the adrenal glands, to release aldosterone. Aldosterone is going to target the kidneys and stimulate them to uptake sodium. With sodium goes water. So as you uptake water, you increase your blood volume. So as you increase your blood volume, you increase your blood pressure. So angiotensin 2 is a pretty potent trigger for an increase in blood pressure. Our stimulus was a drop in blood pressure, and now we can increase blood pressure several ways. By increasing blood volume and by constricting the diameter of those vessels that the blood's going through. So that will be a pretty potent increase in blood pressure that happens pretty quickly, stimulating all of those effectors. Questions on that?
To make the angiotensin 2, that's ACE plus angiotensin 1.
Right. Angiotensin 1 converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 then gets pumped again through the heart. Now it'll go out to the systemic circuit, stimulates vasoconstriction, stimulates ADH release from the posterior pituitary, stimulates thirst, stimulates aldosterone release from the zona glomerulosa. Through all those mechanisms, we're able to raise blood pressure. Questions on the renin angiotensin system?
And dipsogenesis is the hypothalamus that's
Yeah.
being
Thirst.
stimulated.
Yep. So dipsogenesis is happening through the hypothalamus, which is a master regulator of our autonomic control nervous system. And so it makes you thirsty, you go drink some water, you raise your blood pressure, or raise your blood volume, and then raise your blood pressure. Any other questions?
So, and then the aldosterone's in the adrenal gland, right?
Yep, the zona glomerulosa. Other question?
What does RS stand for?
Renin substrate, which is angiotensinogen. And the liver's just always making that, so that it's ready to go. As soon as our blood pressure drops and renin enters the system, they can combine and make angiotensin 1. Any other questions? Is angiotensinogen. Yep. So it's renin substrate, and its chemical name is angiotensinogen. And this like ogen is to make, so it makes angiotensin. All right, any other questions? Anything else you want to review? I mean, that was pretty much a whole review of the endocrine system, like 20 minutes. No, it was more than 20 minutes, but it was good. It's kind of why I wanted to add this fourth day, so that you could, it's a lot of information. So we'll start with blood on Thursday. The lab will be due at the beginning of class. So if you don't have it turned in at the beginning of class, you get 0 points for the lab. So finish it and turn it in at the beginning, and we'll be good.
And if we turn it in today?
You can turn it in today, and then I'll grade it and give it back to you Thursday. All right, any other questions?
For the triacolamine?
Catecholamine?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
So you say, so the stimulus is nervous,
Yeah.
and targets pretty much everything, right?
Well, it's like your heart, your blood vessels, where you're going to you're going to dilate your skeletal muscles. You would constrict blood vessels to like your digestive system. You'd increase respiration.
So general, like, would it just be like sympathetic?
Sympathetic nervous
Nervous
system, yeah. So our catecholamines are norepinephrine and epinephrine, and they are acting basically synergistically with the sympathetic nervous system to increase everything that it's doing.